Good morning, Dr. Roberts. Since you are not only a well-known American journalist and analyst, but also a real truth teller, you do not need any introduction. But let me say that it's really a great honor to have here to answer my questions. So, thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you.
My first question is this. How was the Greek tragedy possible and why?
There were several elements that led to the Greek disaster. Let's start with the indebtedness. The Greek government accumulated a large debt. Much of this debt was not anything that helped the Greek people. For example, the government of Greece might be approached by a German bank, which would pay a bribe to members of the Greek government to take out a big loan from the bank and to use the proceeds of the loan to purchase German submarines. So the Germans would acquire a loan and they would acquire the profits from selling the Greek government submarines for the Greek Navy. The Greek people would gain nothing, government officials would gain a bribe, and the Greek nation would have more debt. So one of the elements was the corruption in the Greek governments that acquired these debts. Another element was that the Greek government, having joined the EU and accepted the euro, had lost control over its finances because without the lira, the Greek government could not create the money with which to service its debt and with which to pay off its debt, because the Greek government could not print euros. Only the European Central Bank, and the European Central Bank would not do this for Greece. So having given up its own currency, Greece could not deal with the implications of its debt. The third factor was that the rules of the game were changed by the neoliberal economists. Previously, when countries had acquired more debt than they could service, the creditors would write the debt down to the level that the country could service. But with Greece, the European Central Bank, led by Jean-Paul Trichet, said, not this time. This time, the Greek people will pay. And how did the Greek people pay? They paid by reductions in their pensions, reductions in their health care, reductions in their social assistance, by increases in unemployment from firing government workers. And then they paid again by having to turn over the ownership of Greek municipal water companies, of Greek ports, of protected Greek islands to foreigners who purchased these. And the proceeds from the sale of these Greek properties went to pay interest to Greeks' creditors. And the people, the foreigners who now own the ports and the water systems and so forth, now charge higher prices. So the Greek people pay again in higher utility bills. So these three elements are what came together to severely hurt the living standards and the prospects of the Greek people. And the consequences economically have been so great that hundreds of thousands of young Greeks and professional Greeks have left the country, which leaves Greece again in a bad situation, having lost best trained, youngest, and most able parts of its population. So that's the story of what happened to Greece. It is a sordid tale of the EU exploiting its own members. So Greece essentially was looted for the benefit of Northern European financial interests, and also for the interest of Wall Street, which had purchased the Greek debt for pennies on the dollar and ended up being paid in full.
In your opinion, who is Alexis Tsipras? A traitor, a psychopath, or what?
Well, I think he was just a politician who was not strong enough to stand up to the financial interests with which Greece had to negotiate. I think that the Greek people themselves were largely responsible for him not having the strength, because they never gave him more than 35% of the vote, if I remember correctly. So any politician that leads a party with only 35% of the vote does not look impressive to powerful financial interests. And so they simply didn't take him seriously. So this was a serious mistake on the part of the Greek electorate. You can't send someone to negotiate your fate without hard, strong support. If the Greek people had had the wits and the foresight to give him, say, 75% of the vote, he would have been taken far more seriously by the EU, by the IMF. But these organizations don't take someone seriously who has such a small percentage of the vote. It's true, 35% was the largest of any party, but it's not an impressive number when you're dealing with ruthless, powerful interests. And so I think that is basically who he is. He simply did not have the kind of support from the Greek people that was required to stand up and be taken seriously.
Do you believe that the global left has been purposely corrupted and emptied of any positive social drive? In the case, by whom?
The left wing was always associated with standing up for the working class. It wasn't really a revolutionary party anymore. It was a reformist party. And it achieved reforms as long as Marxism and the Soviet Union were forces. I think what happened to the left was that when Marxism and the Soviet Union collapsed, they lost their basis, their foundation. If there's no alternative to American democratic capitalism because the Soviet central planning is gone, Marxism is in the dustbin of history, then what is it you stand for? You've lost your foundation. So I think that's what happened to the left. Now, that left them open to be corrupted, and I think that what happened to them is they fell into Jewish cultural Marxism, which has evolved into identity politics, in which the white heterosexual male takes the place of the capitalist. And dark-skinned people, women, homosexuals, lesbians, they all then become the exploited class. And so the society breaks apart into these various identities: male, female, transgender, heterosexual, homosexual, black, white, Asian, Hispanic. And these groups then cannot unite. They are split. The society is fragmented, and the working class, which the left formerly represented, now becomes the bad guy. The working class is seen as the white male, the Trump deplorables, the people who voted for Trump. And so the society is turned inward on itself, and there's no power to confront the capitalist or the government, because the various groups are at each other's throat. So that's what has happened to the left. It no longer represents the working class. It's dissolved into identity politics, and this leaves the government without any forceful opposition. It leaves the capitalists without any countervailing power. There's nothing to stand against them. And so the left is pointless. It no longer functions.
Dr. Roberts, I'm Italian and I care my country, of course. We have a new government in office, and this government is on a collision course with European Union on various issues: immigrants, public debt, economic policies. How do you think the markets will react after this summer break?
Well, it's not only the Italian government, also the Hungarian government, the Polish government, and the German people are at odds with their government. There have been massive protests by Germans this week against the immigration policy that Merkel has accepted. So this is a general problem. Now, as for the markets reacting, there's no such thing as markets. The markets are manipulated by the central banks, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and by the powerful financial interest. And so what will happen is the EU will have the European Central Bank, and Washington will have the Federal Reserve attack Italian finances. They will speculate against the Italian debt in order to drive down its value, to create a crisis. And this is a way of disciplining Italy and telling them, shut up. You have to do as we say, or we will punish you. But it's not markets. They're not any financial markets. The financial markets are controlled and manipulated. And so it is the actions of the EU centralizers and Washington, which very much favors the EU. Washington doesn't want independent countries. And so what can Italy do? Very little. The punishment will be severe, Um, and so you're stuck. The minute you join the EU, you gave up your sovereignty. There are no sovereign nations in the EU. It's a contradiction of terms. Just like there are no sovereign states in the United States. That matter was settled in 1865 when the Northern troops destroyed the South. And so you can't think that you're a sovereign country and be a member of the EU. You are a province in a superstate.
The new Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, seems to have laid a good foundation in the relationship with Trump. Do you think this can help Italy in the near future?
No. Italy's fate has nothing to do with what kind of relationship its prime minister has with the president of the United States. There's nothing you can look for there. In fact, it's not even clear that Trump can protect himself, much less the Italian prime minister. So I wouldn't think there's any kind of hope that some outside force can come to Italy's rescue. Chances of that are very low.
So, what should Italy do to save itself from a Greek scenario?
Well, it's not clear that Italy can do anything. Theoretically, Italy could leave the EU and revive the lira. Just drop the euro and revive the lira, and then the Italian government could finance itself. It wouldn't have the kind of situation it has now because it could create the money to pay the interest and could create the lira to buy back the bonds. But what would happen if Italy took that step? Well, Italy would be punished. The minute Italy dropped the euro and brought back the lira, the European Central Bank would devastate the lira. Wall Street, the hedge funds, the big banks, they would all speculate against the lira and drive it down to zero value because they're not willing for countries to leave the EU. See, only the British are able to do this because they kept their own money. They never accepted the euro. They were a unique member in the sense that they are part of the EU, but they have their own money. So they have never had the problems that Greece has, that Italy has, that Portugal and Spain. So even if Italy could overcome all the propaganda that has been inculcated in the Italian people for decades about being part of Europe, and even if a government could withdraw from the EU and not be voted out of office by the people who would see this as a retroactive step, a revival of nationalism or some such thing, they would then face the challenge of the attack on their currency. So it's not clear Italy can do anything.
Many things in Western countries are related and connected with United States and Washington. So, what future do you see for the Trump presidency? I mean, what possible success in the economic and political field?
If Trump can survive the effort of the military security complex led by the CIA and by the Democratic Party and by the American media to remove him from office, if he can survive this, then it's possible he might be able to normalize relations with Russia and remove the dangerous tensions in which the world currently exists. All during the Cold War, we've never had such a dangerous level of tensions as exists today between the United States and Russia, with American provocations, continual provocations, continual insults. These were unheard of during the Cold War. It's very dangerous. So if Trump can survive the effort to remove him from office that is currently underway, Russiagate is a fabrication, an orchestration by the CIA and the Democratic Party to remove Trump from office. And it is supported by the media. If this succeeds, the most likely result will be World War III, and Europe and the United States will be completely and utterly destroyed. On the other hand, if Trump wins this battle and the Democrats are discredited and the CIA is discredited and broken up and brought under control for the first time in its history, then the whole world changes. Relationships between countries change. The American empire could break up because Trump is not interested in the American empire. He's not interested in having the European countries as American vassals, which is what they are now. And so all these things could change. But it really depends on the outcome of the current struggle in the United States. Trump loses, we're headed into war. Nuclear war. If he wins, there's hope not just of avoiding war, but of the breakup of Washington's empire, of its control over every European country. It remains to be seen. Perhaps what are called the American midterm elections will show whether the population has the wits to stand behind Trump or whether the population has been influenced by the media propaganda and abandons him. We'll just have to see.
Well, you answered partially my last question. The question is this. Which political scenarios are more likely, given the tensions in Middle East, but not only in that part of the world? Because there is a news few hours old that the head of Donetsk People Republic was killed in a bomb attack. So, which political scenarios are more likely for you at this point?
At this point in time, we've had for more than 20 years, going back to the Clinton regime in the United States, we have had American aggressive actions, invading, bombing, and in some cases, utterly destroying other countries based entirely on lies. In the Middle East, the cause of these troubles, in my opinion, is Israel. Israel wants the United States to eliminate for Israel constraints on Israeli power in the Middle East. So that meant Iraq, Syria, Iran. So it is this Israeli influence on the American government that provokes these wars of aggression that the United States continues to launch. Now, in Syria, this was brought to a halt by Russian intervention. They simply said, no more of this. And they've been able so far to face down Washington and enable the Syrian army to eliminate the forces that Washington sent to Syria to overthrow the Assad government. So, what we see here is the rise of a countervailing power, Russia, to take the place of the former Soviet Union, which has sufficient power to tell Washington, no, you can't do that. We also see this power rising in China. China also has the power to tell Washington no. This doesn't sit well with the neoconservatives that control American foreign policy. They believe in American hegemony, that is, American domination, American unilateralism. And they are frustrated by the rise of these two powers and are doing whatever they can to destabilize Russia and China. This was the reason for the American coup in Ukraine, to put internal pressures on Russia. This is the reason for so much American propaganda against China. I don't think the efforts of Washington to maintain its unilateral position will work. It's not feasible. And so we have moved into a multipolar world, just as the Russian President Vladimir Putin says. No, Washington, you no longer call all the shots. No, we're not going to let you overthrow the Syrian government. No, we're not going to let you bomb Iran. So, what will happen? Will Washington accept this? Will they say, well, there's nothing we can do. We don't want to push this. A nuclear war will destroy us. Or are the neoconservatives so full of hubris and arrogance that they will push this to the point of war? As long as the European countries back Washington, in this assault on Russia, the chances of war are much greater. The only reason Washington can continue all of its belligerence is because it has Europe's support. Without the support of the Italian government, the French government, the German government, the British government, and so on, the United States could not have destroyed in whole or part 7 countries in the last 20 years. They could not have done it. They had to have Europe's compliance, Europe's help, Europe's cover. It was cover. Otherwise, it would have been an outright war crime. And it would be impossible if there was international law for any American official to travel outside the country, because they would be arrested and put on trial and executed. So it is Europe's complicity in America's crimes that is bringing Europe to the brink of conflict with Russia, from which not one European will emerge alive. For some reason, the European governments can't comprehend this. The United States can't protect Europe in a nuclear war. And yet Europe continues to back American sanctions against Russia. Europe continues to mouth out the same propaganda, the same lies, the same accusations. Europe is committing suicide. This is the real problem, not the Italian debt, not the immigrants. The real problem is the idiocy of the European politicians who are complicit in Washington's crimes against humanity and are complicit in Washington's aggression against Russia. This is the problem for Europe.
Well, Dr. Roberts, this was my last question for you. I really thank you for your time and your kindness, and I hope we meet again in the future.
Thank you, Costantino, for everything you translate, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate all your efforts, and I think my answer to your last question is the most important thing of the interview. And it's very important to bring it home to the Europeans how they are digging their own grave by supporting American aggression.
I'll do my
best. That is the most stupid thing. It is so stupid. And that's the most important part of the interview, was my last answer. So good luck to you, and I appreciate everything you do and look forward to continue to see your translations of my articles. And I'm pleased to cooperate with you again. I'm sorry it took so long to arrange this, and I'll try to do better next time.
Never mind. Goodbye, Dr. Roberts.